You're with Julian on the Brown Note and the UK race riots and the online civil war. So everyone knows the story. It's a Taylor Swift themed dance event in England. A 17-year-old boy ran in and murdered two very young children with a knife and attacked half a dozen other people with a knife and was taken into custody. The right name the perpetrators in these events within seconds. Within seconds of Donald Trump being shot, I was seeing pictures of the person that definitely did it, who was an Antifa member in America with an Islamic-looking beard, and they named him and everything, all made up. Complete gibberish and had nothing to do. So they were naming various people, and they were saying that it was an Islamic refugee that had just come in on a boat from across the channel and had done this, and that basically our borders weren't being protected and so on. And since then, we've had these enormous race riots all over the UK, and they're burning, police stations, ironically. These are the blue supporters burning police stations. Now, the first initial thing was they were wrong about the perpetrator being both a refugee and Muslim. And the police took the rare step of naming someone under the age of 18 to try and dispel this notion. The way the right deal with being told that they're wrong is that they do two things. One is to say that the information is fake and who they originally said was actually still doing it, which is patently untrue. And the other one is to say they were just as right anyway, because he's black. So this guy is a Rwandan his family originated in Rwanda and was born in Wales. So the fact that his skin colour is different has basically not allayed their problems, or the fact that he is a Christian. So they were wrong, but they still claim to be right. And the irony of them still claiming to be right because his skin colour is black is quite something, as is the irony of the fact that these mobs have been showing up and smashing up white people's stuff left, right and centre. So they've gone in and, they've smashed up police stations and burnt one to the ground in Sunderland. And the mobs themselves have seemed to be split broadly in two. In the UK, there is a term called gammon, and it refers to usually very red-faced, beer-swilling people who I had the displeasure of growing up with, who are incredibly stupid and hold incredibly racist views whilst going on holiday to Spain, and even often owning timeshare apartments in Spain, who were the leader of the whole sort of Brexit movement. In amongst those are mask-wearing neo-Nazis and far-right figures. So one side is just stupid and whipped up into a frenzy over what they've read online. The other have this long-term goal to do this anyway. And are looking for avenues. So you see all these people with these very sort of big jowls and red faces, and then in amongst them are much younger people with masks who are akin to the football hooligans of old, who were often very far right. You look at the Chelsea headhunters, who are very, very far right. Very pro Adolf Hitler far right stuff. But this isn't actually new. People are saying we've had enough, but the same people have always had enough. That we had the same thing in the 1970s. I'm from London and the southeast of England, and we had the National Front everywhere and skinheads. Not the two-tone, we like black music skinheads, but the National Front Union Jack waving skinheads who wanted to protest against basically anyone that wasn't white. And then, you can go back to the 1930s and the sort of pre-Enoch Powell era, where we had, we ignore the amount of people that supported Adolf Hitler in the UK and America. The Nazi League in America was massive. And I'm from East London originally, and our proudest moment is when these fascists actually marched to the East End of London to attack the Jewish population. Tens of thousands of East Londoners came out in defence of them and drove them off, which is arguably East London's finest hour. And the other thing is, these people are not the majority by any stretch. They won Brexit, but that was for a lot of different reasons. But in general, they don't win elections per se. They're actually a small minority of people, but they're causing a lot of fuss. The problem with these kind of issues is always bad faith actors. There are always bad faith actors acting on their own interests, often with disparate interests that aren't aligned with most of the people involved in the movements, but who whip up a fervour. And you can go from Nigel Farage down. The political spectrum in America and in Australia and in the UK has moved the right to the extreme right over the course of, Rupert Murdoch's tenure over the media landscape, where what was once considered mainstream and normal is now considered communism, and what was once considered fascism is now considered normality. So we've got this ever more aggressive right wing on the far end. Like, the middle ground conservatives have just been swallowed and disappeared. As you can see with the Trump Republican Party in America, the mid-ground Republicans, no place like home anymore in the Republican Party. It's either our way or the highway, and that is to be extremely aggressive, always the victim, attack your rivals no matter what, always claim to be right, peddle fake news all the time. And that's happened particularly in the Murdoch countries. So everything's been expressed about this already, but the main thing I wanted to cover on this is the difference between the 1970s and the 1930s, and that is how much online activity and online misinformation is now generating this kind of protest. It has really kicked into another gear since COVID. Since the misinformation from the anti-jab crowd around COVID and their little rabbit warrens on YouTube and Facebook, promoting, which they still do under every single post of anyone dying today, it's so boring. Every time anyone dies, it's like, oh, was that the jab? They're still doing it to this day, but no one actually listens to them. But they do have these very reactive online communities. So it doesn't need that many people to, you need a few hundred people to agree with you and you've got a riot. The thing that I wanted to cover most is the fact that in the lead up to those initial riots, which weren't then stemmed by the fact it wasn't actually a Muslim refugee at all, they've carried on across the UK, almost comically landing the UK on no-go zones. In lots of countries are now saying, avoid going to the UK, which is a little bit embarrassing. 30% of the traffic that whipped up this fervour came from the United Kingdom. 40% came from America. That's interesting, isn't it? We've got people in America like the think tank, the Atlas Foundation, who have existed since the 1980s, and try and promote right-wing, not actually conservative views, but libertarian views, which often dovetail into being extreme right views. And if you don't believe that, then a lot of the people they've supported have been virtual dictator fascists. So even though the Atlas Foundation is a disparate bunch from all around the world, and some of them, in Europe were against Brexit, for instance, but not the main thrust of what's going on. So the Atlas Networks has ties to right-wing and conservative movements, including the administration of Donald Trump. They were one of the leaders of the Brexit movement and anti-government protests in Latin America, the Free Brazil moment that led to the rise of Jair Bolsonaro, and they also used fake accounts against the Cuban government during the Cuban protests. Same in Bolivia, and same in Ecuador, and same in Peru when there have been general elections. Our general elections now are just going to be an absolute miasma, a complete mess of misinformation. Like, it's going to require the public to actually see through it, and I don't give them much credit. Happily, this is one area where polarization comes to the fore, where people just will not vote for the other candidate no matter what they see. Because if people were swayed, the stuff that's going to be coming out between now and the American election is terrifying. But groups like the Atlas Foundation and who they're connected with who might be far more extreme than the Atlas Network, not the Atlas Foundation, if I said that before. It's this radioactive online debates that often happen away from the main social platforms where there's less moderation. You've got like ambulance chasers like Elon Musk piling in like he does like some desperate version of the most desperate human being alive, Piers Morgan, who never met a news story he didn't want to attach himself to. For me, it almost feels like these Atlas Network associates are dipping their toe in the water for the civil war in America. I mean, Elon Musk is a complete idiot. Him saying that, civil war's coming in the UK. These are a minority of people. It's like saying civil war's coming in Australia because of the Dan Andrews protests. How did that go? Dan Andrews won the election. He didn't lose. I don't think he lost a seat. It's a few hundred disgruntled people that turn up and are very aggressive and smash stuff up. In America, that's not true. In America, you're talking about tens of millions of people, all of them armed, and who probably once Kamala Harris obtains some form of unassailable lead against the Trump movement, and that will be the end of the Trump movement, will be genuinely spruiking civil war. I feel like this is a bit of a dress rehearsal, which is terrifying. I said earlier in the year, whoever wins the election in November in America, it's likely to lead to some form of civil war. If Trump had got in, his policies would have been so onerous that the rest of the country, I think, would have rebelled. And if Trump doesn't get in, which I still think, please don't pick Shapiro, I still think is the most likely outcome. I haven't called the election yet, but it's by far the most likely outcome so far. His opponents will be calling out fake election results, the country's being stolen from them. There's a coup in the Republican Party, like they care who leads the Republican Party. Suddenly they care about the Democrat Party. Suddenly they care about the Democrat voters being disenfranchised. I don't think so. So it feels like they're dipping the toe in the water, and this is the way of things now. The online echo chamber is powered now by AI. It is so good at segregating people off into their own echo chambers, providing them with the information that they want. They don't have the same impact on the left, and the right want to make an equivalence with the left and the right. The left always fact-check things. They are much harder to pull the wool over the eyes of, and they're much more independent. And you can see that with something like the schisms in the Democrat Party over the war in Gaza. They don't all follow a glorious leader. They're not into the authoritarian thing. So it's a very different paradigm. But those on the right genuinely do. And there's bad faith actors amongst them who don't really want any government. They just want to watch the world burn, to use the proverbial Joker phrase. Australia's got this coming too. We've had our toe in the water for a few years now with these anti-Dan Andrews protests. A lot of these were tied to evangelical Christians, by the way. We don't talk about that very much, but a lot of these extremists and sovereign citizens are allied with very, very extreme evangelical Christianity. And we've seen the protests in Melbourne over and over again. We didn't really see them much in Sydney, which was interesting given we enacted the same sort of COVID policies here. And you would get people from Sydney travelling to protest in Melbourne, which I always found very odd. The Atlas Network is one of their closest links to Australia is the Institute of Public Affairs, the Gina Reinhart-funded think tank, conservative think tank. And Rupert Murdoch has been trying to force Sky News at night to become, Fox News Australia. And we have a landscape dominated by very right-wing populist news networks like Sky. No one watches Sky News Australia, but they don't care. They just want to use it for grabs that they put on YouTube to enable a forum for these very right-wing views. We have people like Pauline Hanson and Clive Palmer. They've done terrible in elections. But the level of press coverage they get is wildly disproportionate to getting 4% of the vote. And then we look at our landscape where the Sydney Morning Herald would sell out the entire country supposedly being the ones on our side, because Bill Shorten went after franking credits, or Bill Shorten went after negative gearing. They were happy to let a monster like Scott Morrison come in instead. And the rest of it is the Murdoch press, is 2GB on the talk radio, is, Sky at night. We've got this primed populist right-wing news media in this country. We've got think tanks like the Institute of Public Affairs. We've got a Liberal Party that's still in love with toxic and very unsuccessful at the box office right-wing populism. But we've also got a network of very disenfranchised people like the sovereign citizen movement, the anti-vax crowd, and so on, which are exactly the same people that are involved in the whipping up of the fervour and the riots in the UK. I don't see it going anywhere in particular, because I just don't think numerically they have the numbers to do much. But it's going to continue, without a doubt.